All right, good morning. It is Wednesday, July 3rd, and time for another episode of Investing Systems Trading Service, Swing Trading Show. And here's the thing, the market is only open half a day today, right? I honestly wasn't even aware of that until last night. I saw something about it, and of course, it makes sense. Tomorrow's the 4th of July, Thursday, 4th of July. And so there's typically a half day holiday, I guess, that goes along with the full day holiday. So that's kind of weird. Anyway, half a day, and so it kind of feels like a Friday. And I don't know what Friday is going to feel like. My guess is that the next couple of days are going to be kind of dull in the market. So it is what it is. And let me pop over, take a quick look at the S&P. I'll probably do a little quick show today, and sometimes right around the holidays, I think about maybe whether I should bother. Not a whole lot to talk about, but here we are, the S&P at a new all-time high. Right? As a matter of fact, last Wednesday, right here when I was doing the show, looked like we were in for a bit of a pullback, and after that, what we kind of call a parabolic run up, we had a slight sort of dip right there, and this sort of looked like a pivot high, and look at that. We just got a few days down. They turned it right back around. And some of that could have potentially coincided with end of quarter buying, right? So there was the last day of June, which marked the end of actually the first half of the year, right? And so there was a bunch of I believe Russell rebalancing and tons of volume and all this type of thing. And so here we are. And then look at that gap up. First day of July. And so we're third trading day of the July. S&P's at all-time high. Everybody's got their eye on this big round number up here. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, 3,000. S&P 3,000. There you go. That's the next prize. They can make a big deal about that. So, people like big round numbers for whatever reason, and really, in the big scheme of things, doesn't mean a whole lot. Interestingly enough, I was looking at this chart today and I was thinking, okay, it's probably time to delete this line off of it because it just looks kind of weird. I mean, now that we've poked above it a couple of times and below it, and it's so, I'm just going to leave it on there for now because what it represents is the all-time high from last fall. It was September 21st was the all-time high in the S&P, and then of course we got the sell-off, which was about 20%. And so interestingly enough, all this time's gone by, and even though we're up here at record highs and everybody's all excited about that, the market has gone, just barely up over that time period, which is, quite a big time period, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. Doesn't mean a whole lot, although I suppose that, buyers in this area, like last September, October, buyers in that area, they were underwater for a long time, and then it came back up there. So, yeah, this is a pretty steep ascent, I would say. What we got right here. So, anyhow, like I said, zooming in here last Wednesday when I was doing the show, boy, it sure looked like the market was due to pull back a little bit. I had drawn like a little box where that gap is right there, thinking that, hey, there's a bunch of support. There was a ton of support right here that we never even tested. I mean, basically it was just, what's that, a couple of percent at the most, and then turn right back around, and here we are. Market likes to go up. The market likes to go up into options expiration. It likes to go up into the end and the beginning of months because I guess that's when 401k money gets put to work, that type of thing. So here we are, S&P new all-time highs in the history of the world, and today so far is extremely dull. And like I said at the beginning of the show, we're talking about a half a day here. Market closes at 1 o'clock. I guess so that everybody can make their plans to hit the road for 4th of July. I'm going to guess that Friday is going to be one of the slowest days of the year just because people that are doing things, 4th of July is supposed to be a weekend, right? 4th of July weekend. And so nobody's going to work on Friday except me. I'll be here. Anyhow, real quick, look at the IWM. IWM's sort of in its own world here. It's right smack in the middle of this sort of megaphone pattern. It's a long way from the highs. Kind of interesting. I wanted to look at this VTI. This is kind of interesting. The VTI is the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF. It's like probably, well, it's not the Wilshire 5000 because it's actually outperformed the Wilshire 5000, which is one of the broadest indexes out there. And so, interestingly enough, this VTI, which is an actual ETF you can buy this ETF, and it's the broadest gauge of the stock market there is out there. And as we speak today, we're poking out to a new high. So this is always kind of an interesting thing to look at because it's, I suppose that this is the broadest market ETF that you can buy. So there you go. So here we are, right back to right back to the highs, and just barely up. I put this line exactly at this high from September 21st, right? So it hit a high the same time the S&P. Now let's look at the Dow real quick. The Dow is right in that little band of resistance there. So there you go. Will the Dow break out and keep going? I mean, pull away from this? That remains to be seen. There's quite a bit of congestion here. So, the thing about all-time highs is that the market spends very little time at an all-time high. Because I mean, as soon as it hits an all-time high, any little pullback, you're no longer at the high. So, and of course, none of that stuff really matters because we're dealing in individual stocks. But the environment seems to be relatively positive for stocks. I mean, after this little tiny dip we had, I've noticed that on a day-to-day basis, what I typically do is I keep all the open trades in a list over my Thinkorswim, and just so I can monitor them. I mean, obviously, no one's going to have this many open trades, so one has to sort of pick and choose. And some of these things have been open for a long time. As a matter of fact, let me go back. So we got like this CVI has been open since 6/4, right? CDNS since the beginning of June. We've got some of these open, but they continue to go higher. The trailing stop continues to get ratcheted up, and until that trailing stop gets hit, then these stocks are going to remain open. And we have a few new ones. We actually have 4 new ones that triggered yesterday, or triggering for today, right? And we also have 2 that triggered yesterday. And so I thought maybe we'd take a look at those just for the fun of it. Why not? And see what they look like. Now, of course, these stocks that are triggering today, which you will find on the triggered today list, right? There you go. LGIH. It's pretty nice little pattern going there. So I don't want to make too much of a mess on my chart, but there you go. Got a nice little sort of channel breakout going here, and so there's the actual trigger 7245. I just happen to have the note kind of doesn't fit there, so be interesting to see what kind of follow through we get on this. This is kind of a weird little pattern because it runs up to the top and then pulls back to the bottom, runs up, and so it did poke out here. So what we're looking for here, obviously, is a continuation move on this current move. This is a pretty volatile stock intraday. So when I look at this chart, I have I have a feeling that it's going to actually trade at this trigger price, right? Because the length of these bars is pretty substantial on just a typical day. And so it's a decent little pattern. Longer term pattern looks pretty decent. So let's see. JetBlue is another one. JetBlue has a really sort of interesting pattern. This is these airlines, especially this one, very cyclical, right? Big moves down, followed by fairly substantial moves up, lots of zigs and zags. And the interesting thing about this is that once it pulls back and turns the other direction, the move tends to be fairly substantial, right? Now, there's like this big zigzaggy sort of bottoming pattern in this stock too. And so things are looking pretty good. if I was if I was limited to just a few stocks, like if I was looking for like just one or two more open positions, I'm not sure that I would go with this one. Now the target on this, amazingly enough, it's kind of interesting. The target on this is only at 1950. Huh. That's all calculated based on the ATR of the stock, and this is a relatively tame stock. I mean, it does move in these big cycles, as you can see on the chart, big up and down cycles. However, on a day-to-day basis, the you can see the increments over here are only a quarter, right? So that was a pretty nice little turn, little pullback. Let me verify that. The initial stop 1795. Yeah, so that's actually down below the bottom of that pattern. Huh, interesting. So there you go. Target up here. Might as well mark it while I have it on the chart. Target is 1950. It's pretty good, pretty decent little chance of reaching that. I would imagine this stop's going to come up pretty quickly. So that's what I would guess. So let's see. Next one, ENPH. EMPH. There's a good looking stock. Wow. This is pretty amazing. These type of stocks, you've probably in the past you've probably seen somewhere. I know that I have, where a stock is in like an uptrend, and then all of a sudden that trend takes off at an even steeper angle. Those are high momentum stocks, and this obviously is a high momentum stock. So ENPH trigger 1830, closed above the trigger yesterday. So there you go, right there. Today's open basically is valid entry. And interestingly enough, it's right up, triggering right up here at a high. So we're gonna have to see if it can just break out, which it kind of looks like it wants to. That last little dip was kind of ended with this long range bar down, and then it just turned right around, sort of with the market. Super strong looking stock here. So out of the ones we've looked at so far, this one definitely looks the best. You can see that the initial stop here is a little bit above the lows of the pattern. So I marked these last when I saw that these were triggering last night. The update was a little late because I was out running errands, and so I got back a little bit late, and so no huge big deal. Typically, I'm gonna say that the best time to really check is first thing in the morning before the market opens. Okay, so this one looking pretty good. It's actually up a couple of percent this morning. Right? It says 2% here. I'm showing my Thinkorswim says yeah, 2.2%. It's looking pretty good. This is a nice. This looks like a nice potential for just a continuation. So, real quick, while I have this chart up here, let's see. The target is up at 20.05. I might as well mark that. Gives a little perspective on where the target is. And again, the target is based on the ATR of the stock. And so each stock's going to have a little bit different sort of look to the target. It looks doable. It doesn't look like it's going to. Whoops, that's supposed to be 2005. Yeah, it doesn't look like it would take. I mean, if you zoom way in on it, obviously, it looks a little tougher. The further you zoom out on this chart, the better it looks, honestly. I'm so tempted to want to draw a trend line across here. Huh, that's sort of interesting. There we go. So this is sort of a little bit of a knockout. Little bit of a knockout happened last week. You got this one bar that basically broke the trend line. That's probably the best fit for the trend line right there. Something close to that. So, yeah, that's kind of weird. Broke the trend line and then right back above it. So, I don't think it won't. It doesn't look like it's going to take much to hit that target. So I like the look of that one. And okay, and the last one that's triggering now is this CONE, which I didn't get a chance to mark. 5850. That's going to be right about there. And I'll zoom out on this in a second. I can tell by looking at this. Well, nice big move up. One dip and a rally, another dip and a rally. This one's a little bit tricky because whenever I see this, there's an overhead resistance line up here, and there's some there's overhead resistance here. There's some congestion here, and so in theory this thing's got to get over 62 to really get anywhere. Let me draw a lower line here. Yeah, I mean, all in all, not a bad looking chart. It could easily rally up there, but let's see, where's the stop on this? The initial stop, I should say, is right at 56. So there we go. Stop down here at 56. That is below these current lows here. So out of the four that are triggering for today, ENPH is the one that looks the best to me. So there we go. And so, that's part of what we're doing here is the idea that if you're running an institution, you could just buy them all, right? But us mere mortals have to pick and choose, and so that's kind of the system doesn't know. The system's using big universal stocks, and so we don't want to restrict it to just like one or two stocks or whatever, because then we'd probably miss a lot of good movers. I mean, sometimes me looking at the chart doesn't mean anything. Some of the stocks that I like, those four that I just chose, I mean, who knows? One of the ones that I didn't think that the chart looked all that great could be the end up being the big winner. So anyhow, so going back to July 1st, which was yesterday, this one triggered 113.90 with an initial stop at 110, and this is a really good looking chart right here. I like and it's right. It's still right around. It's a couple of bucks above the trigger, but man, that's a beauty of a chart right there. And so the target on WWD is 119. Let me just mark that up here. And that looks completely doable here. I mean, this thing looks like it's ready to break out. So, zoom in a little bit, see if I can get that closer to the actual target. There we go. Expensive stock, but nevertheless, there you go. Let me zoom even further out on this thing. I just want to see. There's 2 years. Yeah, so interesting sort of pattern. There's a couple of pullbacks here. This stop is just like right under these recent lows here, and that's actually a really tight stop. So I like the look of this one. I like the look of that a lot. There you go. So July 1st. So yesterday was the trigger day for this one. I'll just put that right there because that's where the closed above the trigger price, opened the next day a little bit above the trigger, and so there it is. Beauty of a chart though. This gap up and this kind of sideways sort of pattern right near the highs looks like it's coiling up for a move. So, all right, and there was one more that triggered on the first, and that would be PPC. So this one sort of reminds me a little bit of one of the other ones we looked at. When I draw this downtrend line, there you go. Trend line break. Trigger was actually right around that trend line break. So right there, July 1st closed above the trigger. Yesterday, trading above the trigger. This is one of those cases where if you happen to put a limit order at the trigger price, you would not have gotten filled on it. And so that's one of the pitfalls of doing that. I mean, some cases you can look at the chart, and in some cases, you can't always tell, but sort of the one we looked at earlier, like the behavior of the particular stock with I think it was the LGIH with the long range days, you can kind of tell that there's a pretty good chance that that's going to sort of fold back over and touch the trigger. But some of these things I've noticed, and something like this, I look back on the chart and I see sort of this run up here kind of looks a little bit similar to what it's doing now. And once it started going, you had several days in a row where the low each day was higher than the previous day's low, right? A couple of these days, the bar didn't even barely fold back at all on the previous day. There's one long range day. So one of the pitfalls of trying to get in at the exact trigger price is that you'll get these stocks that basically just trigger and take off and never look back. And so, no huge big deal. As a matter of fact, that's obviously if you decided to get in this one, this is exactly what you want to see. So let's see, where's the target on this thing? 27.35. Boy, that's right here. 27.35. Almost there. And the other thing is that I wanted to verify the stop trailing stop 20. Yeah, the trailing stop is still the initial stop. Okay, that hasn't moved yet, but that will likely move today. So real quick, mark the target on here, just so I have it. 27.35. There we go. Looking pretty good. There was some news or something. I remember it's a nice little wedge breakout. This is a pretty smooth chart. As far as charts go these days, it's tough to find stocks that the chart looks sort of. I mean, it has had its ups and downs, obviously, but the price action's really smooth as opposed to a lot of charts I look at. So kind of like the look of that. Um, and so there you go. PPC and WWD both triggered on, and that's a good looking chart too. It's kind of smooth with it looks like some earnings gaps on there. It looks like this stock likes to gap up on earnings. Speaking of which, we are headed into earnings season, which is going to start in a couple of weeks. Maybe even, well, probably not next week, but the following week. So I'm looking at my Thinkorswim with all the open trades on it, and I see a bunch of the little earnings things starting to show up there. And so the nice the nice thing about earnings season is that it it's a way to close some of these stocks that just sort of keep going. Like I always like to look at these. Let's see, CHRS. CHRS. Stock like this just keeps going and going and going, and so I don't see any imminent earnings on this. So anyhow, trailing stop is actually moved up last night. Sometimes I mark these and then I just take the current trailing stop and just slide it on up there. So yeah, this one was a beauty. This this is what it's supposed to look like when they really work. And that's a pretty amazing sort of breakout there that occurred after this trend line break, but what a beautiful setup. It hasn't really looked back. So trailing stops coming up right under these previous lows there. As of yesterday's close, now this thing's down, yeah, less than 1% today, but as of yesterday's close, it was up 24%. So it's a really, really nice looking chart. And let's look at the next one, CDNS. Wow, there's another one just taking off. Trailing stops moved up to 70 now. Was it 69? Let's change it to 70. And of course, hey, these are the these are the top percent gainers on the list right now, but so they're always fun to look at. So I guess I could randomly I like to sort the list by percent gainers and just see what the top ones look like, because obviously those are the ones. Look how smooth this chart is. Similar to a couple we looked at on sort of now it got a little squirrely over here, right, in May. Pretty big sell down and then turned right back around. So yeah, it's just kind of one of a good example of sort of, I suppose, what it is that we're actually looking for and doing here is stock is in a strong uptrend, finally has a pullback of reasonable significance, right? There wasn't really any pullbacks over here. I mean, I don't know that I would call that even a pullback, and that was probably right ahead of earnings anyway, but that wasn't deep enough pullback to do anything. But this pullback here was deep enough to actually put it on the radar screen. And then of course when you see these on the pending list, keep in mind that the trigger will start off high and then sort of move down along with the price, right? And then, so at this point here, the system would have detected that that's a pivot low, and then it started to turn around, and then right after the sell-off, and then the resumption of the uptrend, that's where we're looking to get in. That's the swing cycle there. Stock in a primary uptrend has a decent pullback, turns back around, starts going up, and of course the system's calculating all the pertinent details of it. But there we are. Funny thing is, this chart looks even more dramatic than the previous one, but based on the ATR and everything. This one, the CHRS, this thing's up 24%, right? And this one is only up 14%, even though on the chart that looks like a more dramatic rally. And just take a look at one or two more real quick. So yeah, here's another case. This is an interesting one. This is sort of this is either news or earnings. You get that big long range day, and then you kind of trade sideways, and then of course, there was sort of like what you would call the flat top breakout here, right? Really nice sort of technical pattern, and once this sucker broke out, it just kind of never looked back. And so, I mean, this is a little bit different of a sort of setup because it kind of consolidated sideways and then it didn't really have much of a pullback. So that's kind of interesting, but it is what it is. It's still a really nice looking technical pattern. It's just a little bit different of a flavor as far as what you see. And and so there you go. Hasn't looked back. Trailing stop on this up here at $80. It's already hit the target. And looking good. I want to look at one more because this is the only one on the list. Interestingly enough, this is the only one on the list that has a parabolic stop, which is at 48.45. Parabolic stop. Let's see, where's 48.45? That's interesting. That's way back here. All right, so just mark that on here. I would imagine there's a couple of these. The parabolic stop should probably start to kick in soon because P stop 48, 45. So that never got tagged. Basically, it went and hit the stop, or I'm sorry, hit the stop. It went and hit the target, and then kept going, and this parabolic stop kicked in, and so this will probably end up going below this bar here pretty soon, and so yeah, another interesting chart. You know what's weird about this one? Look at this. There was a previous trigger on this where it had this beautiful pattern triggered in, and then one day, basically the stop, got trailed up the break even, and then one day there was a big volatility day that took it out. And I mean, it's never looked back since then, but that just goes to show that it is possible to get it knocked out on volatility. And so it's tough when that happens because this would have been a really good trade, but instead, I mean, what has showed up on our list is like, a small loss or whatever. I mean, it was only 10 cents, basically break even, but that's one of the pitfalls of the stops. And so, but as you can see, that stop was in a pretty reasonable place after all this price action here. If it started to, like, it could have just as easily rolled over and gone negative. So getting stopped out at break even is not a big deal. And oh, look, they're pushing the S&P up. I keep 29.89, all-time high in the history of the world. I keep thinking that as much as I see the administration on TV talking up the stock market, if you saw Navarro on CNBC yesterday, man, he was just kept mentioning the Dow and the market and this and that over and over, and he's supposed to be, focused on trade, and all he kept talking about was the stock market. And so it's pretty clear that the administration is using the stock market as the primary gauge of how the country's doing. And I mean, just I've seen stories like every time the market's down, Trump is like on Kudlow's case and this and that, and then if the market's up, he's happy and he tweets about it and all this, and so it's just pretty amazing. I mean, it's a strange world we're living in when the president is like, cheerleading the stock market on almost a daily basis. And so, well, I should say every time that it hits a high, right? So I guarantee today or sometime between, today and the 4th of July, he's going to be really he'll put something out there about the stock market at an all-time high, because that's real patriotic for Fourth of July. What could be more patriotic than the market at an all-time high? So here we are. Anyhow, Facebook. Facebook. Now this was one that this is not a that's I mean this is not a real coherent chart. It's sort of all over the map, right? And so this last little, the funny thing is when I see like a down move like that, prior to that, the pattern looked pretty good, and so that kind of skewed my thinking a little bit. What it skewed my thinking a little bit, thinking that this is a really nice sort of a pattern that it had here, but that one day down, you think, oh man, and so you think that it's a broken stock, but lo and behold, turned right back around, hasn't looked back, and it's pretty darn close to hitting a new high, right? Right up in that zone. So anyway, there it is. Stop moved up to 187. Facebook's up. Geez, this thing's up 11% from where it triggered back over here. So anyhow, so this would have been the entry would have been just a little bit higher because of the way it closed this day. So there we go. Anyway, there was last week I was talking about SeaWorld, right? That was remember we on the show last week there was a couple of stocks that we were looking at, and I always talk about sort of figuring out which ones where the chart looks the best. And so the SeaWorld, look how close this thing has come to the target. 3180 was yesterday's high. 3180 is today's high, and so you're 20 cents away from that target. There was the initial stop, 28.75. The trailing stop is now at 28.90. Let me put that on here. So 28.90 is really just it's not that far above the initial stop. That's sort of weird, but I guess it's because the price action is sort of been sideways. Let me put that right there. So this will start to move up with the price. Get it to break even. See, if this thing was all the way at break even now, then in theory, just a normal sort of pullback would take you out. And so it does kind of make sense that this stop is sort of hanging back here a little bit, just because of the nature of this price action. So I would expect like one more leg up, then this stop will come up quickly. But here's the thing about it: if the stop was right here, then just sort of a normal little couple of days could take you out. So it does make a lot of sense to have that the system has calculated that the trailing stop should just barely start edging up now. So anyhow, it's still a pretty good looking pattern. What it needs, obviously, is some follow through to the upside. It's kind of, I mean, it looks volatile, but in the bigger scheme of things, you can see that the increments are only 30 cents here, and so it's not going to take much to hit that target, though. So that's the good news. So the trigger was at $30, target 32. So here we are. Wow, look at this! Look at this market here today. So S&P 3000. Boy, I'll tell you what, man. And I mean, we're up what 9 points here on the S&P. If they can just manage to squeeze some shorts, I mean, I can't imagine that anybody would try and would short this market or actually be short. I mean, if you think that there's a pullback coming, maybe you try and lighten up a little bit or take some profit. I mean, that's why and I talked about this last week. I sort of thought that the market was due for a pullback, but I was completely wrong, and so that's why sticking to a system like this. So if this was just a trade and there was a trailing, there was an entry over here somewhere. And this looks similar to a lot of the stocks, and so if there was an entry over here and an initial stop down here, and that trailing stop keeps going up and going up, it wouldn't, would not have gotten triggered here. Wouldn't hit the trailing stop because it tends to sort of hang back, and so regardless of what I think of the market, the idea is that as the stock keeps, marching higher, then it's going to keep you in. It's going to keep you in the trade, and regardless of what you think, and so that's what's so nice about it. I wanted to look at AMD here because AMD is like super popular stock, right? And so it's still just kind of hanging around the trigger here. I mean, it kind of moved through it. And now it looks like it's consolidating a little bit more. 3050, 2830, target 33. That's what I had marked on here, was this target at 33. So put that on here real quick. All right, so we looked at a few of these. Obviously, you can go through them and see which ones. One thing I wanted to mention here real quick, and then I'm going to wrap this up and take care of some things. Here's one of the things I want to mention is, okay, so you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, Jesus, this AMD actually looks pretty good. I'm gonna tell you that there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with like entering here. So that stop is still, the stop has not moved yet on AMD. I'm gonna tell you that at 3050 right here might be a pretty darn decent entry for AMD, even though it triggered last week, right? See, it would have triggered last Thursday, and so there's absolutely nothing wrong with going ahead and saying, hey, this thing happens to be back, right at the trigger price. I'd actually, if I was interested in this, I'd put an order in right at the trigger price, see if it gets triggered in the next couple of days. Today maybe, maybe not. See if you get filled if you're looking to add an open position. And so that's always kind of valid. And so like going through, that, and that's kind of one of the nice things about some of the stocks that really haven't gone anywhere is that if it looks good, let's look at this LSCC. This is kind of an interesting one. Semiconductor stock. Yeah, this one's a little, let's see, 1450. I don't know why I never tagged it, but the trigger 1450. There we go. So this kind of, this pattern, pullback, rally, kind of looks like it wants to pull back, and so I'd be less inclined. I'd be less inclined to like want to jump in this one on the way down, but nevertheless, that's kind of an interesting one. So there you go. Well, that's basically it. Biggest gainer today is SBGI. Oh man, I thought that I marked this one. I don't know why, but 5240 is the entry here. So that was back over here. 617. There's the entry right there. Yeah, this is a really, really nice pattern. I mean, you can see, you basically see what's going on here, right? And so my guess is, well, my guess, I mean, the initial stop would have been like right down here, and this is another really good looking one. Now it's kind of moved away from 5175 is the current stop. So the current stop is up over here already. So 5175. So there you go. This is another really good looking. I mean, they kind of have different patterns and different characteristics, but something like this, um, super strong uptrend, and then an explosive move, real nice deep pullback, trend line break, trigger right at the trend line break, and so there we go. These increments are a dollar. It's kind of a relatively tame stock, but looks to me like it's turned the corner, and so now it's just basically a matter of. And so let me real quick. Let's see. The target on this is 56.70. Today's high is 56.52. So that target is just basically right there. 56.70. Boy, that's close. So let me mark that. For some reason, we must have had one that was similar, or maybe we looked at this when it was on the pending list because I had thought I had marked this up. But anytime I see a chart pattern that looks like this, I get pretty. It's a very constructive chart pattern. Put it that way. Nice long duration pullback. Turns the corner. This thing's headed up, and so everything about this looks really good. So there you go. All right. Well, anyways, I'm gonna wrap this up because it's basically a couple hours. Fourth of July holiday starts, and so I don't see any reason to just sort of drone on here. So Jeffrey said that maybe I should skip the show today since it was a holiday, but I thought I would come on, look through a few charts, and so hey, all you got to do is log in, go to the open trades, take a look at some of the pending trades, see what's happening in there. You can see Roku in there. That's a pretty Twilio. There's actually a few familiar names. Kind of weird to see some of these home builders, like all of a sudden there's some home builders, but there's some pretty big names in here. This TTD, this is a really super strong stock. Twilio, we had a really good trade in Twilio a while back. It was like ended up being like 30% going into earnings. So things are going to get a little trickier headed into earnings season. So you know how that goes. Anyway, so there you go. Um, I hope everybody has a great 4th of July weekend. And I think that the market is just sort of drifting higher, and so I'm not expecting much to happen until next week. And so have a great 4th of July, everybody, and I will see you back here next Wednesday.